Okay, so topic tonight, which really came out of last week's discussion, is an extension of the idea of working with challenging circumstances and really beginning to experience our own personal karma coming up as we try to meditate. It was interesting, last night Ethan and I gave a talk at the ID Project, and one very nice young man asked a question. He said he'd been practicing for a couple of years and sort of getting into it, and then he hit a wall and started to really experience some aspects of his state of mind that he was that kind of threw him back. And rather than seeing the process as now we're basically getting to something here and becoming inquisitive about that and leaning in, he kind of balked. And that is exactly what we're talking about here, is that at a certain point we might, in our meditation practice, all of a sudden experience things as not going particularly smoothly, and we might experience that in our life as well. So this is something that if we have any last shreds left, even after all these conversations and all this practice of hoping that things are going to run smoothly and turn out well, we're basically directly going against the first noble truth of the Buddha that we talked about, which is that we're functioning in an environment in which fundamentally, because of fixed belief in ego and attachment to outcome and dualistic framework that we have, that we are going to suffer. And that's sort of the basic ground that we're working with meditation practice. So if we still have the idea that we're meditating as a tranquilizer and to kind of smooth out any rough edges, then eventually that is going to come to the surface as a kind of a breakthrough, which is actually a very positive thing if you think about it. There's nobody on the cushion but oneself, and now you're starting to really taste your own mind and your own experience in a very direct and vivid way. There's no possibility, I think, if we think about it for a minute, for any kind of obstruction or obstacle when we're meditating to be coming from anywhere else. That's the beauty of the practice. It's putting a sort of highlight, or in a way we're taking a solo, if you want to put it in music terms. So we get to see our own mind reflected back. So I wanted to, kind of look further into that in terms of what we call in Buddhist practice kleshas, or obscurations, and how we could look at those coming up. They basically take the shape of fairly conventional logic of negative habits, right? So the primary kleshas are things like aggression, anger, jealousy, dullness, general sense of dullness or stupidity, grasping or attachment, clinging, and pride. You could say those are the 5 strongest ones. The 3 roots of it are, as we've talked about before, are the kind of grasping mind and the aggressive mind, the mind of aversion, and then this, kind of general stupor mind, or dullness. And those are so fundamental that I think I would sort of offer this challenge to you when you're doing your sitting practice. Are you actually experiencing anything else other than that? Those things arising. So if you looked at what comes up, not to simply dismiss it and categorize it, but if you look at what comes up as you practice meditation and basically are just an echo chamber with your own thoughts, and then periodically, occasionally coming back to a simple relationship to breath and the present moment. Then what is it that we are experiencing? And usually, if we're having some kind of pleasurable meditative experience, it could often be kind of a notion of being a little bit dull. And this is what some of the great teachers have called dumb shamatha, or dull shamatha, dullness. We sort of want to relax into a kind of stupor in which there's not a lot of sharpness or clarity. Then when it gets vivid for us, what we experience is the intensity of longing and wishing for things to be a certain way, and ideas about that and feelings about that. And then we experience aggression, which is one of the simplest kinds of aggression we experience, is not wanting to be where we are. So that comes up hugely for most people when they start to practice, of just a kind of itchiness and a restlessness to not be there on the cushion and to want to bolt, and almost to a shocking degree. So as I go around, just taught in Durham this weekend and in Kripalu, many people are dealing with the sheer difficulty of sitting still and having some kind of relationship with their mind as it arises, and just simply creating whatever kind of logic, whatever kind of storyline, but not wanting to be there. So this is a tremendously interesting, like if we were scientists, if we were explorers, if we were investigators and somebody told us this, we would go, wow, that's so interesting. You take an intelligent, fairly limber, creative person, and which is us, by the way, and then we are asked to sit still in a very comfortable posture. I mean, obviously people may have their little thingies about it, but for a healthy body, or particularly somebody who does yoga or something like that, or even if somebody's just sitting in a chair, which all of us are doing all day long, I'm doing it right now, there's, for most of us, some kind of fundamental ease with the body, and just maybe little itchy things. And if we have a lot of pain in our situation, that's already part of the program anyhow. So it's not necessarily that it's going to be increased so much by sitting. And if it is, we can find a different way to sit and find some kind of physical posture that is relatively comfortable. So it's intriguing that we take these people, i.e. us, and we sit down and, I ring the bell and say we're going to just sit like this and come with the breath, pay attention to the breathing. Notice the wandering mind, which is wandering through stupor, stuporous thoughts, aggressive thoughts, and passionate thoughts. That's what it's doing. But that mind we recognize as the thinking mind, and we label it thinking, and then we bring back our attention to the breath and kind of let that dissolve into a somewhat non-dual kind of space of just us with the breath. We shouldn't make too big a deal about me and my breath. It's less dualistic than that. So there's a feeling of becoming one with the breath, or feeling the breath, just being there with it. So in essence, we're using the breath as a link to a kind of slightly bigger space of what we would call non-dual awareness, open awareness. And the breath is kind of a reference point for that. And then we drift into thoughts again, which are passionate, aggressive, and ignoring thoughts. So I'm going to sort of invite you all this week, maybe in your practice, to notice when you are thinking. Let's do a little exercise together this week, before next week, and then we can talk about it next week. Label thinking, but also add a label of passion, aggression, or ignorance to the thinking. So you'd say aggressive thought, passionate thought, ignoring thought, or kind of general stupor, generally vague. And see if anything comes up that has a different quality. In that way of thinking, probably we would have to include envy as a kind of aggression, a sort of more specific kind of aggression, and pride maybe as a kind of stupid quality. I don't mean to insult anybody, but pride is usually considered as based on ignorance in this way of looking at it. So Yeah. Hi, Seth. I think I am trying to explain the three root kleshas a little bit more, but I'm going to keep going with that. So thanks for that comment. And as we get to those are the roots or the basis of the bad weather, right? So let's look at ourselves sitting still and being with the breath as kind of open sky. There's a quality of just the weather, if there is any, is very transparent, and we have a feeling of genuinely spacious and at ease. And believe it or not, it is completely possible for us to taste this. We have tasted it. Otherwise, we would not even consider meditating if we hadn't tasted this. So there's an intuitive feeling of just relaxing and going with the sort of sense of, as I said, non-dual awareness, and just merging the mind with the feeling of the breath and the space that we're in, and being very open and kind of very relaxed about any agenda. Even the meditation agenda could be softened. And then what arises, as we said, in this non-dual space, is a kind of beginning of a fixation on an object. We separate out ourselves from the object. If anybody wants to read about this in more detail, there is a great book here that I'm going to suggest tonight, Glimpses of Abhidharma by Chogyam Trungpa, who was this gentleman here. Most of you know this was my teacher. Oops, there we go. So he's smiling at us. Glimpses of Abhidharma. So if any of you don't get that, maybe Seth, could you just write that down onto one of the comments there so people can see it, by Chogyam Trungpa. And this breaks down this process we're talking about in much more detail than we'll be able to cover here. So out of that open space, we kind of, the notion is that we begin to break the world into subject and object. And this happens very fast. It doesn't take, it's microseconds we're talking about here. So the way we would experience the open space is some kind of like flash quality. Or like if you see lightning, it's like just... Then we are not comfortable with that. That's by habit. We're not comfortable with that. So from that, a subject-object relationship arises. This is what Abhidharma means. It's sort of the pattern of how things work. And through a series of what's called 5 skandhas, which if you want to go into more detail, you should go to the book, or we can talk about it more another time. But basically, there's a break into subject-object, me and the world. And in that subject-object relationship, we either find ourselves in relationship to it by wanting to come closer together with the object of our perceptions or thoughts, or wanting to be further away, in the case of fear or anger or anxiety, or kind of an active policy of ignoring. And it's funny, Trungpa used to call it ignoring rather than ignorance, like it's an active process. Like, have you ever been with the person you live with and they're kind of annoying you and you just kind of space them out? That's what we mean. There's might be all kinds of flavors underneath it, but the general strategy or texture of the space is kind of dull and not very alert, not very clear. So those are the 3 root kleshas. Klesha, again, is K-L-E-S-A or K-L-E-S-H-A, and that's the Sanskrit word for really obscurations. They're the kind of activity of mind that block this open quality of mind. They obstruct it. They obscure it. That's the beginning of the weather, right? So, of the mind. Or when we say the weather, we mean it has energy and it has kind of strong movement in it. And it affects us, and it affects our perception of blue sky, So, think about the last time that it rained in New York and somebody says, yeah, it's horrible out. They don't just say it's raining. Because if you just said it's water coming down from the sky, and I'm going to have to make some adjustments to deal with it, that's a different kind of mind than we normally have, where we take all this personally and look at it as somebody's trying to kind of make our life difficult. So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about emotions, really, that come up, that have the intense flavor of ignoring, of grasping, and of feeling strong aversion. That is what's happening during our day to varying degrees of intensity. And I'm challenging everybody, when you do your meditation practice, and can look at your mind, or if you can do it when you're in the field, just with your family or at work or something like that, or hanging out with friends, watch those come up and see that all the thoughts, which are the sort of full thicket of consciousness and discursiveness, are not sort of basically broken into those three camps. So we make it even much more elaborate than the basic feeling. We create a whole storyline. We create rationalization. We create a solidification of that weather, those energies arising. Okay, so I hope that's clear. Maybe I pause for a minute and see if anybody's commented on that. If you are going to, and please do comment at this point if you have any questions about what we said so far. For those of you who are listening after the fact, we're in a multiple time signature here. Obviously, you can't type in. That's the benefit of the people doing it live. You can't type in your comments and questions, but you will just be able to track, my part of it. So I'm going to try, when I relate to questions, to at least read them and give you guys some idea of what we're referring to. So again, for those of you who are just tuning in late, and please, I apologize for those of you who have heard this already, but for the sake of those who are tuning in a little bit later, if you want to comment or ask a question, simply open a second window from the one you're looking at now in your browser and go to facebook.com/DavidNickturn. You will see this right there. You will see this scroll of discussion that's going on, and you can join it by simply typing in at the bottom of it. So, like here. Okay. Sometimes I'm just going to check to make sure nobody's written in on the... good, everybody's doing it the right way. Okay. So, about the three root kleshas, and this pretty outrageous comment that everything we experience is actually emanating from that one of those three buckets. And that those three buckets are emanating from clear blue sky, open space. And that it's possible for us to experience this very, very vividly. If there are any questions there, and if not, I'll just continue on because I have more to say about all this. Okay, I see Jen, you're there. Hi, Jen. I guess you're back. Are you back in California? Probably you are. You're in Costa Rica with KD. And Marzia, ciao, from Roma. So, please, I'll pause periodically and look at the questions, but I want to continue on a little bit in the conversation here about encountering our root kleshas, which is grasping and attachment and ignoring, and that this kind of, I think, maybe slightly outrageous comment that that's all we actually experience. We experience a kind of spacious quality, but as soon as we experience some texture, it's going to be either faintly hued with one of those three or grossly hued. So the difference would be between, like if we were using the idea of weather, and let's say we were talking about anger, we could just have a mild annoyance, like you get to a movie and somebody bumps into the back of your chair once. You just I'm not alone, I'm not comfortable, not secure. That little ride of that, to like experiences that for some reason magically I always have with Cindy when we go to the movies, that there's somebody practicing their soccer game on the back of her chair regularly, and to the point where your experience is completely dominated by aversion to that happening. Or you could think about, thoughts during meditation of where you'd rather be, thoughts of the beach, thoughts of being at the movies, thoughts of food, thoughts of, sensual thoughts. And those arising in that space, and you kind of feeling they're very real, they're very solid. And so the disciplined meditator has to be very complete in terms of surveillance of those thoughts, and not giving any particular theoretical credence to any of them that you happen to be habitually fond of. And some of us are, I think, more attached to our aggression, and some of us are more attached to our passion, and some of us are more attached to our ignorance. So we have to do a little laboratory on ourselves then. So now, how to deal with this? Well, the first note I made in terms of wanting to talk about this is we should appreciate it. And this is a flip of the view, because so many of us come to meditation wanting some relief from all that, and that's completely legitimate. It's kind of like being pounded to have a sort of ongoing experience of the frustrating quality of not being in sync or at peace or at ease with what arises. And all three of these are ways of wishing it was different. There's no peace, there's no acceptance, there's no ease. So the first thing is being grateful is a completely, unique and adventurous approach to take. Even to the extent of saying to ourselves, this is great news because now I can start to really practice. Before I was just kind of dusting the trophies, so to speak. You're dusting off the Buddha on the shrine, and you're preparing the ground. But now this is really practice. How do you deal with kleshas? That is the practice. So without that, there is no practice. There's nothing to practice. There's no reference point for this kind of practice, and we wouldn't be having this conversation. So that's a very interesting point. Many of us have to flip our view and take the approach that we have to overcome a certain spiritual materialism that we've talked about, of wanting things to go smoothly. And this is not wanting things to be gruff and edgy and screwed up. They already are. When our mind is holding these three kleshas, these three poisons, things are already out of sync. Even though it's too subtle to notice a lot of the time, and we're also highly familiar with it, so it seems quite normal. But this is the kind of suffering that the Buddha and Buddhism and the practice is addressing. How to get liberated from that kind of dualistic and graspy kind of mind. That's so normal to us. So common. So, first step is appreciating that this is the fuel of our practice. And even if you get if you grow with this view, you even see that in other people, you go, yeah, this is completely workable actually. This person's coming at me with a lot of aggression, and that is what we're going to work with. So that becomes the seed of your Mahayana or Bodhisattva practice, is working with other people's kleshas. And be grateful for those, because otherwise you have no Mahayana practice. Somebody who wants to be a great Bodhisattva is usually training themselves to appreciate other people's confusion and not try to reject it out of hand or transform it forcefully or for one's own comfort, which, as you know, we've called that idiot compassion. So, first one is be grateful, and the second one is a kind of almost naive remedy, which is patience. And honestly, patience is something that when somebody says, I give up, that's what they're not having as patience. They have lost faith in the process, or they don't have a clear enough vision of the process, or they're too impatient. Now, in terms of the Buddhist view of patience, it's short-circuited by aggression. That's really what we mean by impatience. It's a form of aggression, of wanting to change things, and or wanting to change them too fast, to appease some kind of speedy agenda, which comes out of a kind of habitual quality of being in a hurry, and therefore missing opportunities. So you all know that, if we're in too much of a hurry, great opportunities can come by, and they go right on by if we're too speedy. So a big part of the practice that we do is slowing down, which means being patient, enough so that our kleshas can catch up with us and go, I'm here, let's have a look. And this all would have to precede any notion of transforming anything into anything else. We have to catch up with the ground experience that we're having. So meditating is, deliberately supposed to slow us down, simplify our activity, and allow space for whatever has been in our mind and tends to come into our mind in the form of these kleshas to clearly surface, be seen as it is, and have us take a look at them. And let's call that the virtue of patience. So then the next quality that's going to serve us in bad weather is gentleness, And we always say this so much, and those of us who have been studying and teaching for a long time, and it's been so heavily emphasized, along with kindness, So gentleness and kindness are part of the same thing. To soften when we are confronted with challenge. So our tendency, and some of us are type A's, we push when we're confronted with a challenge. We want to conquer it. We want to do it as fast as possible, and we want to get to the other side and kind of feel we've dominated that situation. And gentleness, as you know, is the exact opposite, and it's a beautiful quality that we have to cultivate again, because I think most of us have forgotten about it completely or somewhat. And it's like when you're a child, if you're a parent like Jello, you must know about this, and your kid misbehaves, you can't just go with your aggression on that. You have to sort of be gentle and firm, would be the other aspect of it, and kind, even if you have to kind of sometimes create some boundaries and some discipline in the situation. So gentleness would be the next sort of step in relating with the weather of the kleshas. And then, a famous one, maybe it's kind of one of my favorites, is inquisitiveness. Like innocent inquisitiveness. So, for example, you hit a wall in your practice, rather than making it too hard and too solid, first of all, we appreciate that we're really into the practice now. Second of all, we realize we need more patience. Third, we need more gentleness. And then fourth, some kind of curiosity or inquisitiveness. What is going on there? For example, if you took it as the Mahayana version, somebody's yelling at you, what is actually happening there? What are they angry about? So we have to, conquer, to be inquisitive, we have to conquer our fight or flight kind of mentality and hold our space a little bit. But then, get out the binoculars, and hopefully have them on the right way so everything's not further away, but it's closer. And just be willing to look and to be curious. So this stops a lot of people, because somehow some of us, our fundamental curiosity, excuse me, Excuse me. Has been stifled. I don't know how that happens to people. But we should examine the kleshas. We should examine the open space. We should want to know how our clothing's made, how eyeglasses work, how hair turns gray, how birds fly, and which is kind of amazing, actually, and how things decay. Why does a flower decay? We should have that kind of fundamental curiosity. And in Shambhala, we talk about training a leader or a ruler, and there it's said that they should have that kind of, and be encouraged to have that kind of very profound fundamental inquisitiveness. Okay, so that's part of our training too. I see more people online, so I want to, at the risk of irritating or boring anybody who's already heard this, and certainly it'll be useless for the people who are watching live, so begging your forbearance there. If you want to comment in, and you're online for the first time and you don't know this, open a second window in your browser, go to facebook.com/David Nichtern, and you will see a scrolling of Q&A that's going on there, and I'll again just write a little right in here now. Okay, so I think it's a good time. I have a few more things to say, but I want to definitely make sure we've had some. Last week in particular, when we were talking about, we were talking about love, I felt like we had a great discussion. Not so easy to do with this format, much easier to do in person, but pretty good, and people were able to say stuff and share some thoughts and ideas. It's, in a way, I'm talking to get the ball rolling in that way. So, curious about your comments and questions so far about the emotional qualities of that arise during your meditation practice, or on the way to it, or in life itself. Excuse me. And now would be a good time to write in some questions so we can get a little conversation going on. So please do so if you are so inclined. I have to refresh the screen to look at that. So give me a moment here to we'll grab some questions from the virtual gathering. Yeah, Joel, childlike curiosity. It's so amazing, isn't it? I mean, in Buddhism we don't say exactly that children are completely tabula rasa, clean slate, because they do have karma coming in. But as a period in life, there's a certain freshness and openness while they're, filling in the details, and their karma is sort of ripening. But the seeds are already there. But there's that quality of, looking at something naively and innocently. And interestingly enough, Joel, I have often seen that face, that expression on the face of many of the great lamas. Almost a childlike quality, and also joy or exuberance, and a totally unjaded quality. You know how we can get sort of cynical and jaded, and somehow the great teachers have completely transformed that. They don't have that, and are tickled by phenomena arising, even confusion and so forth. Sometimes the more advanced the teacher, the more tickled they are by the more weather there is, the better. I would swear that Trungpa Rinpoche was did not favor things going well necessarily as a superficial outing. and was very playful with people's kleshas, and at times you would get. He could transfer some of that sense of humor to you about your own kleshas, and at times it made you feel even worse because you lost your sense of humor, but you're seeing the klesha very vividly. So, absolutely, childlike curiosity. Marzia writes in, I tuned in late because I had to walk the dog. Yeah, 1 a.m, wow. So, and I was a bit upset. Well, sorry to hear that. But there's your weather, so this is good, Marcia. You're right in tune with the conversation. But stepping out there was such a lovely breeze that I thought about my previous negative attitude, which suddenly disappeared, and felt grateful. So this is so great, because this is exactly what we're talking about. That breeze, Trungpa Rinpoche used to call it the breeze of delight, literally or metaphorically, that some kind of the quality of breeze just kind of like blows away dark clouds and as literally when weather moves on, it's moved on by the wind coming through with a clear space. So we're looking to the experience you had in our practice. We're looking to pull that trigger on our own, without having to wait for the melody of circumstance to do it. In a way, we do all kinds of things to invite the breeze of delight. And one is even recognizing that it exists. And we call it basic goodness. And we call it, bodhicitta. And we say that it comes with a warming of the heart, and it comes with an opening of the senses. And it comes with a natural arising, spontaneous arising of our perception of the sort of fundamental goodness in the situation. So thank you so much for writing in. That's fantastic. For most of our practice, we're going to be fluctuating between some sense of connecting with the goodness and the breeze of delight, and sometimes we won't even be able to remember that we ever heard those words or ever felt like you just felt with walking the dog. And we all know what that feels like, and that is dark weather. That is intense weather. We're practicing so hard to recognize that it's impermanent. We're practicing so hard to recognize that it's not made of anything substantial. It's not solid, right? Weather is never solid. It comes and it goes. And then we're practicing to recognize that it has within it the very qualities of our own enlightened mind. And that's when we get into the notion of transformation. The anger has clarity. You guys have heard me talk about this before. The jealousy has efficiency in it. The dullness has some kind of spaciousness in it. The craving has some kind of appreciation and discernment in it. And the pride has some kind of richness in it. So we cannot jump over the fence and say, I want those things. Those things are inherent, but we have to really recognize some of the fundamental qualities about our mind. And if we stop when the thing gets hard and when it's challenging, that is the time to increase the practice, that is the time to lean into the practice, and that is what we're saying today. It's almost a signpost saying, practice here. So that will, in a minute, we'll get to, which is my final point, but I want to see at this point, hopefully people are starting to write in. I really invite you at this point to become unpassive or actively contribute. I see some of you have, so that's, of course, makes me feel a little less crazy from sitting alone in a room with a computer, talking to myself. So let's see who's kind of showing up with what kind of comments. So, Seth, what's the difference between thoughts and emotions? That's a good question, and I can say the sort of standard things, which are good to get off and out into the world there. The way that it's frequently talked about is that if you thought of paint, that the thought would be the sort of texture and quality of the paint, and the emotions would be the pigments that give it its specific coloring. Or you could reverse that. But in other words, there's a mixture of a kind of story aspect. Like if you took the notion of being angry, and we're saying that all the thoughts, by the way, Seth, we're saying in this talk, all the thoughts are also emotions. There are more neutral kind of thoughts, which sometimes have more the quality of ignorance, just sort of prattling around, musing, so to speak. And they're not particularly harmful in any way, but they are sleepy still, and are not the same as a kind of vivid, clear quality of being awake. And then there are the thoughts that have more strongly coded or colored emotions, and they still have a storyline. So, for example, why is this one of my favorites? I don't even have a boss anymore. But the idea of a boss that you, but you do. So the idea of having a boss who's, kind of oppressive and too nudgy and drives you crazy, and then you feel there's that story. You're recounting incidents that happened, and they should have done this, and I should have done that, and if only they would recognize, all the work that I've done. Everybody has this scenario with their bosses at some point. And then there's a feeling of kind of like, ugh, you could almost make it like a sound, like it's just like an elemental aspect to it, and that's what we call emotion. So what we really call an emotion or a klesha is a combination of sort of the discursive or kind of storyline thought and then the kind of energy of it. And in the transformative process, we work with the energy and kind of liberate the thought. There's actually not that much wrong with going, argh! It feels good. But if it's too much energy has been pent up for too long, that can turn into, instead of having the simple clarity of anger, it begins to become rage and torrential, and we have a heavy downpour. So the more we can move with the emotions, the more they're transformed, and more we can strip away some of that discursiveness, the more the emotions can transform into the 5 wisdoms. Okay? So now we have a whole bunch of comments, so let me take a look, and we still have a little time to talk a little bit. So Neely, hi Neely, nice to see you again. The weather that arises that I have the hardest time using those responses to is anger. Yeah, and as I mentioned, some people more strong connection with anger and more strong connection with passion on some other people. How to be grateful for anger. How to be gentle with anger. I can be curious about it sometimes, and that helps. Well, then that's a great starting point. We could ask ourselves, why are we so angry? I mean, that's a completely legitimate question, and it's so much fairer than being, it's so much more creative, I mean to say, than feeling we're the victim of other people's trips that they've laid on us, and that's why we're angry. Well, maybe it is, but unless we explored it, we would never know. So looking at the anger, my experience with anger has been that it has kind of roots that are often really far away from the flower that grows. And, there may be some analytical process there of looking at the details. But that is a great place to start. And in order to be curious, if you look at it that way, that you're going to have some realization from understanding the real source of it, you would be grateful for it. Not that you go around asking people to hit you, like remember in high school when you put the thing on the back saying, kick me? Not that, but, those situations are the ones in this lifetime that are allowing your experience to arise. And you can be analytical and say, somebody else said the exact same thing to a third person, and they didn't get angry at all. So what particular is in the situation? I'm not saying that we can't legitimately be angry and clarify certain situations. That's the enlightened aspect of it. That's clarity. You just say, you know what? I don't want to eat with you anymore. I don't want to go out to dinner with you anymore because you're eating off my plate half the time. And we never discussed this. I didn't offer, and you just assumed that. So you know what? I'm going to go out to dinner with another friend. That's completely fine. The person is just getting feedback. But there's nothing festering us about that. If we're sitting in our meditation and thinking about that person and their bad habits all the time, we haven't used that energy creatively at all. So I think all the things we're talking about is, appreciating that. Maybe appreciating it doesn't have to take the form of gratitude. I find that a little preachy sometimes when people be grateful, but it's in there. Be grateful to everyone is right in there. But appreciate it. Like, it's interesting. I think your curiosity is going to be the link there to just looking deeper into it. So then Kathleen is saying, I think it takes a lot of trust and courage to be able to look at some of the really uncomfortable feelings that come up. Well, absolutely spot on. Kathleen, I'm just remembering I owe you an email back. So I'm going to make myself a note to write back to you. Sorry about that. Okay. And we are saying this is the path of the warrior. It's no accident that Trungpa Rinpoche wrote this book called Shambhala, the Sacred Path of the Warrior. The main point is that it takes confidence, courage, and daring, and to overcome all kinds of doubt and fear, which is what the obstacles really are made of. So I think we all agree with you that it takes trust and courage. And we all should look, what could help us with that? Is it other friends who are practicing so we can bounce some of this back and say, I'm having a really hard time here? Is it a teacher who can, feel very comfortable with the process that you're undertaking and not freaked out in any way by the fact that these experiences arise and maybe has some insightful method or comment? Is it studying more, or is it just leaning in and doing it, the practice? So from Tyler Dewar, Dear David, I tune in for a few minutes during my workday, but alas, work choicelessly beckons me back. Gee, I wonder where you are. Maybe you're out in the West Coast. I don't know, because it's 7:52 in New York. I hope you're not still working if you're in the East Coast. But anyhow, great teachings, and thank you for offering this. Cheerful New Year of the Water Dragon to you, and all good wishes. At the end, I should say something about the New Year starts tomorrow in terms of the Asian, the lunar calendar. So we'll talk about that at the end. Thank you, Tyler. If you get to hear this, maybe you'll tune back in and you'll hear that I read your comment and responded. Neely again saying, I'm also not very patient when anger arises. I want it gone. Well, as we said, and this is, I don't think I could emphasize this too much, patience and anger are antithetical. And when you study the paramitas, the biggest obstacle to experiencing patience is aggression. So I think we all agree. Jen is saying, I can feel a lot of restlessness. What klesha is restlessness related to? Aggression, all three? How to work with restlessness in practice? You want to duck between the cracks in those three, huh? I'm going to say restlessness is aggression. It's not a very intense form of it. It hasn't taken... looking underneath, there might be something more intense. But in that just sort of itchy feeling, that's the onset of just kind of our general hostility towards being where we are. It can't be anything else. Because the fundamental posture you're taking, the fundamental quality of the space is inherently peaceful. There is a very, very pure open ground. And our restlessness is somehow, and this is your Shambhala training level 2 kicking in at this point, there's some kind of habit that does not want to abide in that space. And the onset of it is just what we call, it's hot boredom. It's that itchy quality. So it's definitely in the category of aggression, as far as I'm concerned. And there's no sneaking around it. Let's see, Teresa Hernandez. Several times in the last few weeks, I've had students talk about frustrations. It was interesting that in both cases, they were concerned about others being frustrated. I started being really curious about this. I think sometimes they have been protected from frustration as if that isn't what is natural and part of learning. Will you say something about this? Well, there's a couple interesting things in there. Whenever people ask questions about other people's experience, like at a Dharma talk, I like to always bring it back to the questioner's experience. It reminds me of, the guy who goes to the, police officer says, I have this friend who just, parked in that space over there and, it was you the whole time. So I think, it's fair, in my case, I would ask people to just bring it home one more notch, if possible. But in this case, I'm not saying that to you, Teresa. You're asking about how to advise somebody in this case. And frustration, I think we're saying, is natural, as part of learning. Even more than that, it's what we have. If you can't be curious and interested in learning about what actually is happening, your curiosity becomes very, very theoretical. So I think you're just encouraging people by example to pay more attention to their own experience and the subtleties of it. And their own wisdom and insight will come through. So that's a thought there. Kathleen here. Can you talk about fear in terms of klesha? Yeah. Aversion seems odd for fear, which is much more like a drawing in. Wow, I'm not sure I completely grokked that. Aversion seems odd for fear. Oh, a drawing in terms of a retreat. Okay, now I see. Aversion seems odd to use that as a expression of fear, which is more like a drawing in. So I think, we know about aggression goes both ways, right? We have active and passive aggression. And both of them are a kind of withdrawing from the immediacy of the situation. Both forms of aggression. So all of us have been really actively aggressive, and all of us have been passively aggressive, in which we withdraw. But underlying that, because of our curiosity and because we're taking the time, is there anything underlying our need or our desire to withdraw or to eliminate a threat in the situation, perceived threat? And usually, I think you're exactly right, that is fear. And I think what we would say is somewhere between that kind of open awareness and the kleshas arising, the three root kleshas arising, there is some kind of very fundamental, hard to get your mind wrapped around, anxiety or fear. And the way Rinpoche might have talked about it, it's a fear that we don't exist. And to make that more contemporary, it's a fear that we don't exist in the way that we've grown accustomed to thinking of ourselves as existing. So it's unsettling. There's no doubt at all, if you go deeper into practice, at some point you have to taste that. You have to taste that, a feeling of groundlessness. And it's not particularly a comforting feeling in the traditional way of looking at those things, because something's getting stripped away. What's getting stripped away is a delusional notion of how things are. And that delusion is strongly rooted in the negation or the ignoring of the fundamentally impermanent quality of ourselves. It's a very, very... it's not even that easy to wrap your mind around it. Like, I was at the doctor's today having a checkup. I was just 64 on Sunday. The joke we have, is that, well, maybe I made it up, I don't know, but maybe me and Steve Gorn made it up. At 60, the warranty's up on this body. You're still fine. You go, but if you call I have a warranty on this body, they just laugh at you and they go, no. The warranty expired. You didn't read the small print. What it means is little things start to go. And gradually, even if you live to be 100, between 60 and 100, little things are going to start to go, and maybe some big things are going to start to go. So as I'm talking to the nurse practitioner, and she's, inquiring about all my little thingies, and I'm looking at her and I'm just saying, we're all going to die. And she looked at me. I think she was trying to encourage me to, which is reasonable, to be as healthy as possible and eat well and get good exercise. But that has never kept anybody from actually getting sick and dying in the end. So I don't say that to be morbid, and I have to tell everybody who's out there listening, at 64 I feel more energy, more optimism, and more fundamental faith or, kind of quality of goodness and vitality than ever in my life. Period. And at the same time, the physical machinery is running down. And I'm all up for maintaining it. That's a relatively wise thing to do. But I don't have any delusions about it. And I think that's our fundamental delusion, is that we've grasped onto our own sort of ongoing existence in form, in the realm of form. And so we can't work skillfully with transformation, changing form, which is happening all the time. So I think fear, to answer your question more specifically, Kathleen, is underlying, but it's a kind of basic anxiety about our existence. It's what creates ego in its rawest form and then in its most developed form. Ego is fear's baby. So Lizzie Quinn. Hi, Lizzie. I haven't seen you before, so welcome. She's in Starbucks. How fantastic is that? Dharma in Starbucks. We have to remember that one, Seth, and do one of those. We'll broadcast from Starbucks. I like that idea. Where the internet connection is perhaps prohibitively bad. Sorry to hear that, but I will reiterate that you can, either next time you can log in from a better location, but you will be able to see these, everybody, by simply going back to Ustream Live button on my Facebook page and clicking on it. You'll be able to see this video archived pretty shortly after it's finished. Excuse me. And you'll be able to see all the other ones. I think we've got about 15 already at this point. So encouraging you to do that if you're having a hard time live. And that also goes for everybody else. There's quite a few other videos you can check out. But hi, Lizzie, and if you're still with us or you see us later, welcome. And curious where you're coming from in terms of where that's, if the Starbucks in New York or outer Slovovia. So where are you? We have time for a couple more, and then I think we should wrap it. Neely, I think what I'm saying is the physiological response I have when I'm angry seems so incompatible with these other qualities. It is incompatible. And you are saying a powerful thing, Neely, there, which is that when we practice at a certain point, we're going to have to begin to work energetically and with the psychosomatic body that we have, the mind-body configuration. Because all of our experience, even though it's fleeting, is stored karmically into our body systems. That's what a body is, in a sense. It's just an accumulation of karma. It's not very romantic. But our body has accumulated all the karmas of the past, even before this lifetime. If you believe in that. If you don't, it's okay. It doesn't really matter. In this lifetime. Start from being a baby. Start from being in the womb. Wherever you want to start. Start from 2 days ago. So the physiological experience of the kleshas is eventually how we're going to get at this thing. First, we got to peel away the sort of discursive layer of thoughts, because that's a complete distraction, basically. That probably we're never so far from the truth as when we're just blathering the thinking mind. And in a way, the shamatha meditation that we're doing is to just get some penetration through that layer. And then, of course, you start to experience the energy of these things and the physical residue. And, the body becomes a very important element. And at a certain point, we do certain purifications that involve physical exercises and mantras and, sound and form. And it's pretty hard to go all the way through to the formless realm without processing and purifying some of the forms that we've created, karmically speaking. So I hope you understand that. But I appreciate what you're saying. I agree with it completely. It's very insightful. So, and finally, Janet, deep sadness over here in our neighborhood. School bus accident and neighbor child killed. So sorry. Wow, neighbor child. Several still in serious condition. Good opportunity to practice harder. Well, just a brief thought there. Absolutely. My suggestion is practice Maitri for those people. Tonglen, if you know how to do that. And go over and help some of the people out if you know them. And it's so funny when we're helping people. I don't advocate any particular strategy or dharma thing. Just go over and figure out what would be helpful. And a lot of times presence, just showing up is huge. So sorry to hear about that. It's right in your backyard, so to speak. Anyhow, I'm going to take one more look here, and I think we have to wind down now. As much as enjoyable as this is to have the dialogue coming up, that is what is, I think, proving to be very, very worthwhile. And I hope the people watching afterwards, you still can benefit from the fact that other people are asking these questions. Okay. I am going to read a couple more in the grand old tradition of Trungpa Rinpoche. We go a little long sometimes. This is nothing. I remember doing what was called level B and F of Shambhala training. They were on the same night. Level B started at 11 a.m. and the level F started at 3 a.m. So, we're relatively merciful these days in terms of following schedules and stuff like that. But let's take a few more, okay? I'm going to kind of go quickly through these, and then we are going to wrap. Jen, can you repeat that? You can repeat it by playing it again. Anger is related to what? Not wanting to be where you are. That's what we're saying. And it's not anger, it's aggression, or a kind of subtle aggression. Not wanting to be where you are is, you ask which of the three root kleshas that would be associated with, and it's aversion or aggression. I don't want to be here. Even if it just seems like a little restlessness, it's still saying, I don't want to be here. You and I can talk about that more if you want to, okay? Jello is saying, Jod Kabat-Zinn says that our children are like small, rowdy Buddhist masters sent to teach us the lessons we most need to learn. Gee, I've actually got a big, rowdy Buddhist master who's 33 years old, my son. Maybe we should view kleshas this way, too. Yeah, but I would say they're not external. It's just us, experiencing us. That's why it's so workable. It's not like an invasion of the body snatchers from outside. It's us. So anyhow, I just want to add that notion, Jello, to what you're saying. And otherwise, it's super cool. Lizzie, I guess, Lizzie, you were in the Starbucks, right? I like what Ethan said last night. Oh, you were there last night? Okay, now I have to figure out which person you were. Visualize the room. Something about being gentle when you're having a hard time and want to stay away from the mat and just allowing yourself to sit in position for a set period of time. Yeah, I think that's better. That's like kind of at least making friends with the cushion and the space of it. So sure, that's better than not going near the cushion and feeling allergic to it. He's saying, you can sort of make some contact there. Did I understand it right? It's a bit of lowering your standards of what is a successful sitting session. I think we're doing that all the time. I mean, our standards are not that helpful, and successful is really kind of, what if you had one? What if you had a successful? Would you stop? I'm advocating unsuccessful sitting sessions here, which is going to be my final comment. Just take what comes and work with it. And if you can't do that because you're too agitated, then Ethan's saying just sit down for a minute and relate to the space of just slowing down enough to do that. So Brandon, whoops, posted this in the wrong comment box. Could you talk a little bit more about the seeds of positivity that are inherent in jealousy, anger, impatience, etc.? I often find myself judging those feelings and thoughts and feeling a sense of failure or being let down with myself. Brandon, it's just too late in the program because that's a big topic. But I just want to tell you all, I'm going to be in Wilmington, not this weekend, but the following weekend, talking about the five Buddha families, the 5 wisdoms, and really the flip side is the 5 kleshas. So go to empoweredyoga.com and look that up. If you're anywhere near the area and can join us, come on along. And otherwise, we'll talk more about that. We'll introduce that idea into one of these talks coming up. So thanks for the question, and we will go further in. And finally, Lizzie, what you are saying about opposites, anger and patience, reminds me of a podcast from Ethan I listened to once about how to combat laziness. Get up and do something. Do the opposite, is what he said, I believe. If you can. The opposite of laziness is doing something, and usually if you're being lazy, that's what you can't do. So, there's kind of strategies and little tricks and stuff, and then the main point is sooner or later we got to kind of just dig in and get to it, and it's always going to be like that. So we can trick ourselves and make New Year's resolutions and do the opposite and jump through hoops, but eventually, at the end of the tunnel, you end up, and there you are anyhow, so it's going to be choiceless in a way. And I want to end on this fabulous comment from Neely. I think my body's warranty expired at age 45. Maybe it was made in Yugoslavia. We read you loud and clear, Neely. So just in closing, the final slogan about the kleshas. We talked about appreciating them as fuel, generating some patience, gentleness, being inquisitive, curious about it, and I'm adding this last one, which is a slogan from the Atisha slogans of mind training. Abandon all hope of fruition. That's a pisser, that one. It doesn't mean give up. It means keep going and keep working with what comes up, not always from the point of view of a goal orientation, but having some appreciation for their journey. So, dear friends, tomorrow is Shambhala Day. It's also the kind of functional Chinese New Year. So if you're in New York, come to the Shambhala Center tomorrow at 9 a.m. And there's all kinds of practices going on, and then an address by the Sakyong. I don't think it's too late to come. And then there's a nice brunch. So I hope I see some of you there, if you're in the New York area. And think of tomorrow as a sort of, you can restart your clock in a certain way. It's sort of entering a new year. It's called the Year of the Water Dragon. And you can look online and see some of the implications, but as far as I understand it, it's probably a very creative year. A lot of potential for manifesting creativity at a very powerful level. So, we look at those things as a way of general trends, so to speak, like Twitter trends on a cosmic level. And so I'm wishing everybody right now a Happy New Year going into that. And we will be back online next week. I thank you all for joining in. And we'll be back online next week at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And in between, please feel free to just drop me a message on Facebook and, say anything you want. This is our virtual Dharma community here. So feel free to join in. And meanwhile, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all beings never be parted from freedom's true joy. May all beings dwell in equanimity, free from attachment, aversion, and ignoring.